Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Latest Thread. First, we really want to thank you all for your input and sending us some suggestions for topics that you want to hear about. So one of the ones that we chose was to talk about show quilting. Entering shows, some of the ins and outs, things to think about if you're going to enter a show. So kind of the first thing we want to talk about is why might one enter a show? So should I go?
They're competitive in nature.
Go ahead, Karen, you go first.
That's all I have. No, it's just, I don't know. It's like self-validation that what you're doing is actually meaning something to people. And I don't mean about like the judging critiques and that. I like going to shows and listening to people that are talking about my quilt. So I just stand there and I listen. But I think no, because they're like, oh, I wonder how she did this. And then you listen to them talk it out and you're like, that is not even close to how I did that.
No,
so I think
I did that one time, one time only, because I stood on the other side and they were not nice. They didn't know what she was thinking with that thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am never, ever, ever doing that again. No. I generally don't even go see my quilt in a quilt show. I don't want to see it. No. Because that was like a bad thing for me.
Oh, see, I don't know. Maybe I don't value other people's opinions. I don't know. That's awful. I don't know. I don't know. It's very competitive for me, and it's not even competing with the other quilts. It's competing against myself. Like, can this next show quilt be even better than my last show quilt? How can I fix all those bad critiques that I got and change them on this one? So, yeah, it's just, you're like that, your validation that what you're doing is getting better. But then that's a whole other topic for later, the critique stuff. So we'll get to that later.
I also agree with the validation. I mean, you work on something and, maybe some of us make it specifically to enter in a show or because we want to learn a new technique. And so therefore, Karen's right, I think. You compete with yourself, a combination of what the critiques tell you need to improve on. I mean, most of us don't really take criticism too well because, of course, we think we're awesome, but of course we're not. So I mean, I do want to learn, to improve because making quilts is really not the main focus of why I like quilting. It's more the long arm quilting. So I have a lot to learn when it comes to making quilts. So that's why I enter. And I do enjoy looking at all the quilts at a show. I know those of you who have gone to a show with me often get annoyed because I take the time to take lots of pictures holding everybody up, but I do enjoy looking to see what other people were thinking. I like to read the tags, what's the thing behind the story behind the quilt. So for me, that's something, I like for other people to see the quilt that I made because I don't do very many of them.
Can I add to your taking pictures of quilts? Just because it's one of my pet peeves. Whenever you're at a quilt show, always take a picture of the card.
Exactly.
I plan on sharing that quilt anywhere because, people want to know, and the people that made it want people to know that they made it. So just, their own acknowledgement.
I definitely agree. You take a picture of it, zoom in so people can see it because you have to, just like with everything else, you have to give them credit, when you're sharing it on social media or whatnot. And besides, even for your own reference, as you look through the pictures later, it's nice to know, that was so-and-so and.
What's funny is when you meet that person later in life, like I have pictures from old quilt shows and I'm like, oh, I'm friends with them now. I really like their work then.
Sharon, anything?
I don't have much to add because I don't have the competition experience that you all have. I think it's a little bit of a different game in Canada. There's not as many shows that you can enter your quilt into if you don't belong to the guild that's hosting the show. So there's a couple of juried shows that you can enter, but I design patterns and sell my own patterns. And one of the stipulations for one of the shows locally is that if you write a pattern or you design a pattern and you sell the pattern, you can't enter that quilt into a show because it's self-promotion advertising. So there's some different things about competing here. We just don't have the magnitude of shows that are in the U.S. So, and I'm too busy quilting for other people that are winning ribbons with the quilt, but not for myself. Because we're so busy paying the bills for the quilting that we're doing. So I'm here to learn you guys on this one.
Yeah, for me, it's the same thing. The competition, I enjoy that. Never really thought that I did, but I do. But I also like to hear the comments. I mean, that's a good way to know where you're at, your skills, and what needs improvement. Hey guys, sorry about that. We had a little technical difficulty there, but we're ready to go on kind of the next topic, which is make sure when you're going to enter to read everything, all of the dates, the deadlines, the descriptions for the categories, because sometimes the shows will, if you enter, let's say, the wrong category, they'll move your quilt, and you may or may not really want it to be in that category. So for me, one of the lately, I don't know, must be my age, I've entered a quilt into the same show twice, like the following year. Mm-hmm. Or I enter one show and then I enter another show and realize, I'm not going to have it back in time to send it to the other one. So really, you need to check that out. I double check now.
I actually keep a spreadsheet in Excel, and it has my quilt details. It has a picture of my quilt when I made it, the linear inches, the square inches, because some shows, they do it by square inch, not by the actual quilt size. So it has all the information, if it's been appraised, what it's been appraised for, and then I list every single show that it's been at. So sometimes in a year from now, I'll look and go, oh, it was already there. So it just helps me to, the non-organized person has to keep a spreadsheet.
Well, I'm non-organized, but I'm not a spreadsheet maker either. Mm-hmm. But now I have a little index card for each quilt, and it says where I entered it, what year.
But I find in regards to the categories, that's probably the trickiest one, because some of you have mentioned that you're competitive. So not only do you have to find the right category where you feel that your quilt actually should be entered in, but then you may also consider who else might enter into that same category. Yeah. So that can be a determining factor whether or not you may want to enter the quilt show if you're that competitive.
Well, what I found, when you put your quilt out there, I always say the circuit, because shows only have a 2 to 3 year span that you can put that quilt out there. So sometimes if you're coming into what you're saying, Ava, if I enter a quilt and there's already 5 major best of show winners in that category, my quilt will do nothing. It'll do nothing. And then maybe, a year later, it's winning everything, because like what you said, certain quilts move in and out of the same circuit.
Well, and the reason why that could be important, not just for the fact, that we are competitive, but it's also quite costly to enter a quilt show. Depending on where the show is, the shipping alone, back and forth, on top of the entry fee, can be costly. So if you know you don't have a chance at all based on the categories that the show offers and who you know probably will enter, to me, honestly, that has to be a deciding factor.
Mhm.
You know,
And
uh,
especially a lot of these shows are charging big shipping fees.
yes, a lot of times I find that the return shipping, and I understand it has to be handled properly on their end. So I'm sure it's a valid, reason for it being that costly, but it generally is usually at least double of what I paid to get it
Mhm.
there. And so therefore the cost factor is definitely,
Mhm.
important. So if I entered the quilt 2 3 times and it didn't do anything, I just have to tell myself perhaps, well, it just wasn't meant to be, and stop, spending the money on it. And it's disappointing because, you know not that, I personally feel, it's the greatest thing ever, but, you took time. Generally, when you enter a quilt, it's not based on a pattern, it's your own design. So, a lot of time went into that planning it. So, but at some point, I guess you say that's it.
I don't know. I let it travel for its whole competitive life, because some of my quilts, like they started out, like I said, and they won nothing, and then the last 3 or 4 shows, boom, they ribboned at every one. So if I had followed that philosophy, that quilt would have 0 ribbons. So and it's personal preference how much money you want to spend.
Well, and I think another part of that too is that you can enter a quilt in one show and it does nothing, maybe 2 3 shows and it does nothing. And it's not, I don't know that you can say, oh, my quilt, it like sucks or whatever. I mean, because every show, different people enter.
Yep.
So it really depends on what other quilts are there. Because
Right.
every show you might be competing against a whole different group of quilts. So that's another,
And how they're judged too, because sometimes they're judged flat on a table, other times they're judged hanging. So and I mean, I don't want to say that, but it does come down to, I think in the end, personal preference. I really do.
Sure.
Mhm. If they're both spot on with everything, that's why I always say, binding, because they'll start nitpicking. If you have 2 perfect quilts out there, they'll start nitpicking the two to find out which one is better. And
Well, the binding is a big factor, like you said, but then also I've seen it where, quilts, 2 quilts side by side, and they both were in the running for best of show. And the one that got picked was because it had a higher level or degree of difficulty. So, there's all kinds of things.
Mhm.
But getting back to the categories too, sometimes it's frustrating too if you make a certain style of quilts, like Jody makes modern quilts predominantly, and I've made some modern quilts to enter, and very few shows support that category. So therefore it's difficult, then you have to choose. I mean, yeah, it still can fit into wall, or, if it's an applique modern quilt, it can fit in an applique category. But then you also know that now it becomes very difficult, especially at, for instance, an AQS show, if you're in on an applique category, when you know that there is a lot of the Japanese artists entering, and their applique quilts, have
Phenomenal.
500,000 little pieces, whereas a modern quilt has 12. So that's definitely going to have to be a deciding factor. So
Yeah.
it's an art, actually.
And well, even when you're reading the categories, you have to be so, like, you might have a quilt that's 62 inches by, just say 62 by 62, and the wall goes up to 60, and say the large quilt starts at 80. So you have this great quilt that you can't put into that show anywhere. So sometimes I like when they label it, just wall, because then your 62-inch quilt can go on a wall. Whereas if they stopped it at 60, you can't get it in that category.
And that's something, if you pay attention to the categories and that the shows offer, you almost have to do it the other way around. You have to know what the criteria are and then base your quilt design that you're making, knowing that you want to enter those shows, because, they change the sizes not very often. They may change the categories, but not the size requirements. So therefore, you have to do it the other way around, knowing that you want to enter that.
Yeah.
It's an art form.
It is an art. Yeah, entering is an art form. And
It definitely is.
yeah. And some people will actually just make their quilts to fit categories. I don't do that. I get the idea in my head, and then the quilt takes 87 years to be born.
I'm right there with you.
Then it's going wherever it fits. It was just a little exaggeration.
Yeah. Okay, so I think this is a good time for us to take a little break. And when we come back, we have a couple more things to talk about in regards to show quilts.
Hi everyone, I'm Georgia Stull and I'm here at the Gamble Education Center today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the thread break sensor. I've talked to some people and they say, my thread break, I get a false alarm right at the beginning, or maybe they say, mine doesn't even hardly ever go off. Do you know there's a place that you can make some changes to find the sweet spot for your thread break sensor? What you need to do is go into your software, have your software open, go to Service, go to Technical Support, and then right at the top of the list is Controller Definitions. Click on that. You'll get your little message box, and you'll notice right toward the bottom of the middle, it says thread break. Well, I want the thread break, so I want to keep that checked. But what I want to change is thread break delay, and it's in seconds. You'll note that the default is 0.1. So if you need it to be a little more sensitive, you can change it to 0. If you need it to be a little less sensitive, you can change it to 0.2. Try that. If that doesn't work, you can try 0.3. You can go all the way up to 0.5, but I would do it in 1/10 of a second increments. And this way, your thread break sensor works for you. It's not too sensitive. It's not sensitive. It's just right. Happy quilting, everyone.
Welcome back, everyone. We are going to talk now a little bit about, let's say, okay, you decide you're going to enter a show and you're all set to go. Now you have to worry about shipping and prepping your quilt to go to the show. For me, I find that kind of the most tedious part. I always try to look at the deadline when it needs to be there and decide the latest I can send it, that it'll make the deadline. But I don't want to send it at the very beginning of the time frame, because I don't want it to be, you spend so much time, you block the quilt, you keep it super nice, and then you're going to fold it all up in a little ball and put it in a box. And, I don't want it to get there and sit for like weeks in a box. So
yeah,
that's a pain, I think.
And then the art of folding and tucking little tubes of crushed paper or bubble wrap in there so that the crease is the least. You're still going to get a crease, but the crease is the least crease you can get. And then searching for a box that'll fit.
And Karen just recently did a Facebook Live in regards to blocking. If you're interested, you can go back to the Gamma Facebook page and check out her video, because she also showed a couple tools like the laser lights she used. So that's a great little presentation as to how you can prep your quilt. But yeah, I find, like Jody said, you block it and you prepare it. You make sure there's not a speck of lint on there. And then, you see some of the shows that are layering the quilts on the table. So you can only hope that the other one that it's laying on top didn't have lint on it or anything.
Yeah, that's real common at
You know.
guild shows when they're there. You get your quilt back, and like the whole back of it is covered in animal fur because the quilt under yours had fur all over it.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of it, and I think whoever judges it should recognize that. There's a couple shows that actually steam the quilts, when you're before they're or when they're hanging them. So they try to help out and make sure they're, hanging straight.
That's also one thing to note. If you know that the show does steam the quilts and you have a problem with your quilt being steamed, you have to contact them.
And it's usually on their paper. You have to agree to it, that it's okay for them to steam it. So, but it's still a nice thing because some of the shows you literally have to have the quilt there a month prior to the show because they take it themselves to the location. And that's a long time. I don't care how careful you are folding it, it's still going to affect how it's going to hang.
Yeah. I think it was like last year or two ago anyway. I was at the store and it was in the fall and they had those pool noodles on sale for like 50 cents. So I bought a bunch of those. And then when I get them back, I just immediately, most of the time I take them immediately out of the box and I roll them back on there and I just put pins to hold it. And then they just stay nice. So when it's time to send them somewhere else, I can pull it out. Sometimes I just let the box sit there for a month or two and
Guilty. Mine don't live on pool noodles though. I put all of my quilts flat in my guest room so they all lay stacked on my guest bed.
That would be ideal.
And I'm like, I still have to rotate them because what if a little bit of sun comes through the window continuously on that one, the things that you have to think about. So yeah.
And one of the things we didn't talk about yet, I'm pretty cheap, frugal, whatever word you want to use. So when I take my quilt to ship it, I just take it to the post office, and they, insure it automatically for $50. And then they ask you, do you want to add more insurance? And of course I don't. So far I've never had an issue, but other people are horrified. They make sure that they get their quilt appraised, before they even send it off to a quilt show. And they spend extra on insurance, so we all, I think, have different points of view on that,
I ship FedEx.
Get yours appraised also.
I get mine appraised, and then after 5 years, I get them reappraised. Because appraisals only last so long. So if you have like a 8-year-old appraisal, the insurance companies could say, yeah, but the market has gone down for quilts because there is a fluctuating market on quilts. But but I ship FedEx because they give you up to
Across
500.
the street.
Huh?
Because it's across the street. No.
It's actually around the corner. And the post office is way across town. No, but they insure it up to 500. So $499.99 is like included. And I always laugh because they're like, insured? I'm like, yeah, $499.99. And they've told me, they said, don't worry, they're going to look for it because they do not want to cut you that check for $499.99. They will find this quilt. But yeah, I used to, when I first started, I would insure it for $10,000, $12,000, and I'm like, oh, this is insane. Yeah, your shipping is outrageous.
Yeah, and I do the same thing as Ava. I mean, I just take her to the post office. It's like 1 minute down the road, so that's the way I'm going. And I honestly have had not ever, knock on wood, a problem. I mean, and I don't want to have to, I hate signing for stuff.
Right.
Just put it in my mailbox or put it wherever. I have a giant, like, rural mailbox, so you can put a huge box in there. And I don't get any insurance either. And I think it's just not, I'm not definitely not saying you shouldn't, because I know, it's just how you feel about your quilt. Only you know how much went into it, what it means to you, and I feel like I'm one of the people, I guess, that feels like, well, if I truly lost it, I could just make another one. Would
Yeah.
I? Probably not, but
My one quilt, Wanderlust, Gamma was shipping it back to me, and UPS got a little crazy there because I got a package that was going to someone else inside of my box. So crazy stuff happened. But what's really gets me is my name is on the label. It's all packaged in plastic. My business card is taped on the top of the plastic. And after 3 days of harassing UPS higher ups, they did find it in an unclaimed storage room, wrapped in plastic, with my name and phone number and address right on it. So it's unclaimed, but they don't bother to contact you. So don't ever give up on your lost quilt. Keep calling them, keep emailing them, because it was just sitting there, and they put it as undeliverable, unclaimed property.
So we should probably talk about one thing that, for sure. And to me, this is one reason that you should enter a quilt. If you've never done it, you should give it a whirl. I mean, there's nothing better than getting the critique sheet, but keep in mind, you have to be able to take it, because sometimes, you might not like what you see. But for me, I feel like that's kind of one of the best parts about entering a show, is that you can get some constructive criticism, and, I want to improve. If I did something horribly wrong, tell me so I can fix it. Would I fix it? I personally probably wouldn't fix it. I just wouldn't enter it again. But, you might want to fix it. Would I ever take my binding off and redo it? Absolutely not. I hate binding.
Well, I got a critique, and they said, the quilting distracted from part of the quilt. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. They're crazy. And now, after doing a lot more show quilts and a lot more reading of critiques, I'm like, oh, it sure did. So, just, I always say take it with a grain of salt, because you may not think it pertains to it, but the more you learn about it and the more you realize your own personal quilting growth, it probably was true, so just take it and learn.
And the same for me. I mean, as I said earlier, I'd like to have the opportunity to improve, because if I want to do competition quilts, obviously I need to figure out what I need to do different, at least for the technical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously that shouldn't ever apply to design, etc. But, I do hope that, most of the quilt shows use criterias, and they judge the quilts based on those criterias. And my hope is that they're objective when doing so. I imagine that's very tricky to stay objective, but
I like the ones that have numbering systems.
Yep.
I like that much better. Because it's like, 1 to 10, where did I land? Did I land at 6 or did I land at 9? And I don't know if it makes it easier for me to understand, but when they get all wordy and this and I'm just like, it's just too much. I like numbers. Boom.
I mean, we have a local quilt show that's actually quite big, and we use a numbering system. And several of our judges, we use one that went through the national certification process. And they really do like the numbering system. So a lot more shows in our area have taken on that numbering system. And I do like it, because the scribes, they have only so little time to look at each individual quilts. So clearly most scribes can't add all these comments on everybody's, sheet. So if you have the numbers, then like you said, Karen, then already, that's obviously a concern. If you only got a 2 out of a 10, you definitely need to address it. But if you're at the top part of that, then you think, yeah, look at it more closely next time, but you're going in the right direction anyhow.
Well, I always relate it to pain. Like when you're in the ER, they don't say, how you feeling? Well, crappy. I'm feeling crappy. And the word crappy to 17 different people means 17 different things. But when they say on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your pain? 11. Okay. You know? It's just straight into the point, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think too with the critique sheets, you know, you have to, I think in reality, if you think about your quilt, when you look at that, before you even, I guess, see the sheet, you know, I think,
What your
I
issue?
know what I could have done better or what was wrong. Then usually when you send it, you hope, no, I hope they don't see that, you know. So I think a lot of times the things that are on there, as much as you don't want to see them, yeah, you know, I
They're
know.
there. Yeah.
But what I find the funniest is that usually what I know I did wrong or I should have fixed or whatever, it usually isn't what's on there. And I'm like, what? They saw this. They didn't even see the real problem. So it's kind of, I don't know, funny. I mean, in one time, and I get it, you know, quilt shows have a ton of quilts, and from what I understand, I've never watched it, but they have very little time for each quilt. But one time I did a whole cloth, and I got on my critique sheet, it said that the stitch in the ditch was not in the ditch, and I'm like, well, there's no ditch. There's not a ditch on the whole thing. So, you know, sometimes, you know, you just have to let it go if it.
Well, and I think that part of that, because that happens a lot, you get things that aren't even related to quilt. And I think that's the scribes, like doing their real quick shorthand. And then when it's their turn to rest, they go back and rewrite things. And they can't even read their own notes. So they're like, oh, yeah, that must say stitch in the ditch. Yeah.
Okay. Can you guys think of anything else that?
I want to hear Sharon's take on all this since she doesn't do competition goals.
I have to unmute myself because my dog was noisy for a bit there. I feel like I don't want the competition part of the quilting to take away my joy of creating. And as I said before, one of the reasons I haven't, well, I've shared some of those reasons I haven't, but I felt like if I was going to, that I would wait until I was making a quilt. And when I was finished making it, I felt like it was good enough to go into a show, then I would do that. Instead of starting a project that was, okay, this one's going into a show, because I feel like that process would just make me redo everything that I did. Does that make sense? Like I'm critiquing myself the whole time and not really enjoying the process of making it. And I don't want that to be robbed away. And I said a little bit on the break that one of the things that discourages me is all of the other factors that have nothing to do with your quilt itself, like somebody's personal opinion or who else is competing in that. And so how do you really truly compete against yourself if all of the other factors that have nothing to do with you or your quilt are determining how you place? So that kind of sits funny with me. And so I've entered one quilt into one competition, and it didn't place, but it got really good, like out of 1 to 10, and good notes. It wasn't even a negative or a constructive comment, like a feedback, a corrective comment on there. It was all good. So I mean, it should probably make me want to, but like I said, I don't want it to affect the process of how much I love to create. So, but it's sorry, my cat and animal issues today. Just bonking just trying to, you know, rub her face up against the side of the computer. But I think it's fascinating, and it's cool to see people, you know, getting the ribbons and the acknowledgement and the credit that they deserve for all their hard work. And I think it's so necessary for those of us who don't compete very much, because we need that inspiration from you people, right? We need to see that. And so it's inspiring to other people. And that's a good reason to compete that has nothing to do with winning, is just
The spark.
sharing something that's completely different and inspiring other people to say, okay, I'm not the only one that has a weird mind like that. Look at what that person made, right? What even is that? So that's another some abstract stuff can get pretty weird in some of the quilts that I've seen, but I remember my first time to Houston and seeing the quilts that were there were just so much next level and so inspiring. So, you know, I guess that is one good reason to enter that has nothing to do with placing.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you're right with the not thinking so much about it, because generally for me, I find that the harder I think about it and work on something, the worse it does. But the things that I just make because I want to make it and I really like it, and just do it and don't be like, oh, this has to be just so, does better.
Yeah, and your heart's in those things, those projects.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, I hope that everyone will, our intention was not to scare you off. We just wanted to share our experiences. I mean, I think entering is a great thing. And if you make something that you just so love, you should definitely give it a try. I mean, enter it, share it. Everyone would love to see your quilts in a show. You know, I'm kind of someone, I'm guilty of going to a show. I'm unlike Ava, because yes, I go to shows with her and it's like, come on. Because I can do a show super quick because I walk the aisles and I look at them all, but I really stop and look at the ones that strike something in me. You know, like I am drawn to this particular quilt. Then I'll read the labels and all of that. And I hope that doesn't sound bad, but you know, I think we all like what we like, and you're drawn to what you're drawn to, and
Yep.
You know, so you guys should give it a try, enter a show. And right now there's so many of these virtual shows going on and stuff, and you don't even have to mail your quilt. How much better could it get, right?
And you can take pictures of your quilts from all the best angles.
Right, in the best light. Okay, so we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.